Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, and this is take two for nerds by nerds. And I'm hanging out with a point of inspiration today, and we're going to be talking about 101 Knights of Subare. And I'm probably butchering that, but that's okay. These guys will correct me. That's what they're here for. So let's basically everything we just talked about a few minutes ago, let's do it again. That was great. Take it from the top.
All right, so I'll introduce myself again. I'm Chelsea Dabbs. A lot of people know me better as DM Night Hag. I run the graphic design department over at A Point of Inspiration. Anything that you've seen visually, from the 9-page primer to the illumination pages that we've teased here and there, that's all me. I decide visually what goes into the book, with, you know, a good amount of suggestion from the other two. I'm not a mean ruler by any means.
All right, I'm Chris Wilhelm, originally from the channel Drop Dice. That's how most people can find me. I am the editing slash kind of idea bouncing board here for Point of Inspiration. And then for Subare, I will actually be doing the map and doing some of the illumination and editing to help out with the graphic design side of things.
So my name is Marquise Hardis. I'm the lead writer at A Point of Inspiration. I basically do all the core writing in the books, and I come up with all the mechanics, or at least the foundations of them. And then I bounce them off of Chris and Chelsea and a few of our other consultants that we have outside of that. So that's pretty much what my job is here.
Awesome. And like I said, we actually went live a little while ago and had to do it again. The Googles, for whatever reason, was recording but not playing. Happens. So I guess we'll take it from, you know, where we're kind of talking about, you know, why you guys decided to do this, what you felt was, you know, lacking out there that made you guys decide to jump in. And also, you'd also talked about, you know, you were going to do this in the DMs Guild, but moved in a different direction.
Yeah, so Subare is ultimately what Adventures in Middle-earth is to 5th edition. But instead of Adventures in Middle-earth, Subare is based upon the Arabian folklore and stories that it draws inspiration from. Kind of similar in vein, where we're trying to pull from a lot of the historical and fictional, in a lot of cases, kind of stories to create our own world based upon it. We're doing a lot of that inside the game. Like there are terms that are relative to the area that we draw inspiration from. I mentioned it in the previous stream, but I'm going to assume that none of that got heard by anybody, so I'll mention it again. I got my start in a very narratively focused system, Legend of the Five Rings, and it's been a system that has been with me for a long time. It is so in-depth into its narrative that the mechanics are entirely designed to exemplify its narrative. And that's one of the things that we've really taken on board, is to try and create mechanics that surround the narrative to the story we're trying to tell. So the first step was to kind of think about the kinds of stories they are, and they're high adventure stories. So 5th edition, while it's very good at combat, it lacks some things to help support the idea of high adventure. When you see stuff like Sinbad doesn't fight monsters every single port he goes to. He sometimes has an adventure where he has to go scale up an unscalable cliff and retrieve a sultan's turban and bring it back to gain a wish to do something else, because the stories are kind of complicated like that. So we started thinking about some of the extra things that wouldn't be necessary. The project originally started as Al-Qadim plus a couple of minor things, but it slowly blossomed into our own IP. And a lot of that has to do with the idea of these new mechanics, one of which being skill challenges, which we'll address a little bit later, and the new magic system that further exemplifies kind of the nature of the influential countries.
Excellent.
So I'm a big believer in the fact that if a game doesn't have a mechanic, the game does not support that mechanic. Of course, you can create your own mechanics and you can house full things and make up stuff on the fly, which is totally fine. We completely support that, and we do it ourselves. But if the game doesn't have the mechanic, you have to make it yourself. Well, basically, like I said, the game doesn't support that. So when we were working on Subari, back when it was originally Alkadim, there are a few things you'll see in 5e that they don't have. Skill challenges, like Chris mentioned, verbal duels being another one, so like social combat or social encounters. And as we started making these things and creating these mechanics, at a certain point, it was just no longer base 5e, right? So it could no longer really fit on the DM's Guild regardless, because it would be like putting Adventures of Middle-earth onto the DM's Guild, which is just kind of, it doesn't make any sense because the DM's Guild is for like supplementary adventures and new lore and new monsters. And while we have those things, just the new mechanics that we have for Subari itself really differentiates it from the core game.
Yeah, and breaking into like one of those systems is basically the idea that we've thrown the entire existing magic system in 5e out the window and sat down one day and had what was a 5-hour conversation building the bases of new classes and new magic systems that they would use. And that mostly comes from the fact that while 5e is good at doing what it does, we didn't want a world where somebody just threw a fireball at you. It's not that type of world. It's more flavored than that. There's, and some of this is fluff, but mechanically speaking, it goes in another direction as well, which Marquise wrote the lion's share of these this new magic system. So that's definitely his domain to go deep into it.
So you guys mentioned some new classes, changing the magic, bringing skill challenges back into the mix, and also, would you call it verbal sparring or verbal
dueling? Yeah.
Verbal dueling, that's it.
Yeah, it's in its most simplistic form, it is basically combat done on a verbal scale. There's a set of rules that really kind of support it, and the way that I kind of described it when I was doing the editing for it is, I said it kind of feels like the Ace Attorney games. You say objection, and then you say what your objection is, which is funny in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it makes it very uniform. So you can say, oh, I want to bargain. This is what I'm RPing out by bargain. So there's a structure and an RP phase to it. And the good part is it doesn't heavily require you to be a very good, for example, bargainer as a person. It does rely on your character stats. However, it encourages the RP to go with it, because I know, at least my home group, one of my guys, he likes playing social characters, but he's not a very socially graced person. So sometimes when he does the RP, I give him bonuses because he's RPing and he's trying, but honestly, his argument isn't very good. So this system kind of helps alleviate that sort of thing.
That is like the age-old like Nerdarchy argument that we've had in numerous discussions, and it is essentially if someone is really good at RPing, they can kind of like ignore certain skills, opposed to someone, and then the person who maybe isn't as good or invested heavily mechanically in their character, then they're kind of being penalized, for that. Where,
yeah, I mean, I always make the joke, I don't make you break down my door, so why should I make you RP out the social encounter? Like, to some extent, I'll have you explain it, and that's just generally how I run things. And this mechanic does basically support that. There's a little bit of explaining that goes into it, the RP side, but ultimately, the mechanics will support it. So even if you, as a person, are not necessarily super skilled in having an argument yourself or establishing kind of a factual conversation, the game itself will support that and help you out with that.
Yeah, I think we've negotiated to some middle ground in between.
That's kind of what we're shooting for with the verbal duels. Marquise, you want to go a little bit more into how the mechanics actually support that?
Yeah, so how a verbal duel works is like the biggest difference between it and combat is that you only have two people actually talking to each other. Everyone else is supporting one of the two parties in the verbal duel. So let's say you have a party of 4 people. One person goes to talk to the Sultan in Subari. The other 3 people have a list of actions that they can use on that person's turn to support his argument, to step into the argument, to distract the other person. And basically how it works is you roll initiative like normal between these 2 people, use charisma instead of dexterity because the most charismatic person will end up talking first. You choose which action you want to use. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the other person's charisma modifier to 0. So basically once it gets to 0, they've lost the debate or the duel. and they have to concede, and you basically get whatever you wanted from the verbal duel, right? That's kind of like the reward for it. The important thing to mention is that if you have like a charisma modifier underneath 0, so it's like -1 to -5, it's still basically just considered a 1. And every roll you do is towards the enemy charisma score instead of the AC. So as you make your rolls towards that charisma score and you get their charisma modifier lower and lower, it's basically showing that you're taking control of the conversation, control of the verbal duel, and you're swinging things in your favor.
Okay, nice. So basically, through the social interactions, you kind of have almost, I want to say combat actions, but it's not combat clearly.
Yeah, there's definitely actions for it.
And guys, for you guys following along, the links to their Facebook page and the Drive-Thru RPG link for their free product will be there shortly. As I'm talking with you guys, I'm kind of working on that as well to make sure you guys can check them out and follow their future endeavors. So how long has this project been in the making? How long have you guys been working on this now?
I think the official answer would be 6 months, but it's probably been going longer than that. Marquise has had this in his back pocket. He's brought it up for at least the whole time that we've been together as a point of inspiration, saying, hey, I want to do this. And we all kind of have that one project that we've kept in our back pocket. And we're at various stages of it, but Marquise brought a really solid point to us with, hey, here's the foundation. This is what I really want to do. And that's pretty much how we handle any of our projects, is we pitch them to each other. And if it's something that we buy in and we believe in, we go full into it. And that's part of the reason why we focus so much on Subari. It originally started as an Al-Qadim conversion to 5th edition, but like I said, it just got, it started as even Al-Qadim Plus, and then it just got more heavy on the plus side to where we were eventually like, okay, it's its own IP. Let's do some changes here. Let's make it really its own thing. And ever since then, I think, at least on my part of this triangle here, my investment has been way heavier. I like what we've done better than what Al-Qadim was, just because it's more driven to kind of a flowing story narrative. Like one of the things that we really focus on is making Subari your Subari inside there. There's a lot of roll charts and things like that. While the official map in the book will have some cities located in there, none of those are canon. None of them are official. In fact, our map that's going to be the art map for the book is just going to have locations from our playtests. It's kind of a nod and a thank you to our playtesters. So it'll be like an illuminated map that has some ancient runes that an adventure happened. That way the playtesters can see that and say, hey, I was part of that, or I watched that video, something like that. But the official play mat will leave a lot to the GM. And that's part of the reason why I like it better than Al-Qadim, because it focuses on your world, your story, rather than pre-existing world, pre-existing story, which both are fun to play in, but it's a different kind of fun.
How long you guys have been playtesting this thing?
In various stages, we've been doing it for pretty much the start of it, because what Marquise brought to the group to convince us was playable material. And as we've done playtest, we've added new mechanics with each one of them. The latest mechanic that's seen a lot of success is the verbal duels, but we've had stuff that kind of got phased out. Like our original intent, the reason we started doing a lot of 5e archetypes and stuff at the beginning of the year is because we weren't going to change how 5e mechanically worked. So like there's a brawler that I did the lion's share of the writing on the brawler for the fighter archetype. And that was my intent, to have kind of this bare knuckle slave fighter type character. And it just didn't fit as well as some of the changes that we've really implemented. With a mind towards mechanics, really what kind of set us free to be able to really start heavily playtesting lately is that decide to change from being Al-Qadim to our original IP of Subari. Like one of my favorite things, which I'll get Marquise to kind of touch on, is the idea of poisons and teas and hookahs and why they're important to the culture and how they kind of show up inside the game. Because we just implemented these with the latest little first bit of playtest with some of our closed-ended playtesters, but they'll be inside the next full version.
So when you guys made that switch from going, okay, we're going to put this in the DM's Guild to this is our own thing, did that change anything for you guys?
Oh, massively. It changed everything. The day that it happened, there was a post put up, and I immediately messaged Marquise and I said, please, for the love of God, listen to them. Please. And the second we made that switch, I became reinvested because I had taken leave because I had had a baby. And I kind of came back to a half-finished product. So I wasn't like, I was kind of like, oh, I'm doing the art. That's great. It's cool. But then the second we went to full, RIP, that's when my brain started exploding because I always felt kind of held back by the word and the existing Alkadim setting because I'm actually a really new player. I started almost only 3 years ago and immediately started working with Marquise about 6 months after that. So it's been kind of like a quick road for me. And I wasn't comfortable walking into something that somebody beloved, like Alkadim. It's a very loved thing. And when we made that switch, I think it was within days, I was like, we're gonna do new magic cards. We're gonna make the patterns for their spells be printable. We're gonna make new character sheets. We're gonna design this from the ground up. I'm gonna rate this region. It's gonna be super influenced by Nubia and Egyptian. Like, things exploded from that moment. The entire magic pattern system that Marquise has created came out of existence from nothing to a full system in 3 days. Marquise?
Yeah, that's about right. I sat down with one of our consultants he really wanted me to make a new magic system because we didn't feel like Vancy and casting really fit that well for Subari. Like Chelsea said earlier, it's not a setting where a dude just walks down the street, throws a few fireballs, takes a short rest, and then throws more fireballs. That's not what we were trying to go for. So I sat down with our consultants. I made the new magic system. The original seed behind it was that magic is art in Subari. We didn't want anyone to actually say words like magic and spell because magic has a connotation and a definition to it that doesn't really fit our setting if they actually had this for a very long time. So basically the idea is that magic is art and art form has patterns to it. The more you repeat these patterns, the more powerful you become. So by divining these patterns and achieving these mystical and powerful effects again and again, you basically become able to use more powerful effects, divine more powerful patterns, and to a certain point where you might as well be throwing fireballs at everybody. But at that point, you're almost a legend inside of Subari itself already.
And when we had our meeting last night, Chris said something, and it really clicked with me that describes the magic system in our game, is that there is a law of nature and science. He looks at it a very scientific method. And I can't exactly quote you, but you said something last night, and I think you can remember what I'm talking about, that explained it perfectly.
So in Vancy and magic systems, it's an idea that it's a scroll that's handed down, and this is how you cast Fireball. This is how we've always cast Fireball. The way that the patterns work is it's looking at what makes a fireball, essentially. It's the science behind the idea that, like, in Arabic cultures, patterns were very influential, and really exemplifying that so much so to talking about how math works, and it's by extension how fantasy magic could work with this foundation of mathematics and geometry. So for me, a lot of the things that I really like about it is the fact that the patterns work a certain way and only in that certain way. Basically, each pattern has up to 5 mediums that could be used to create the art, which is the spell. And the mediums could be things like vapors, mathematics, the cosmos or the stars. I'm forgetting 2 of them now. Marquise, help me out.
The 5 mediums that you would have is cosmos, so that's basically anything in nature from stars, water, hills, dunes, storms, all that stuff. Dance, so the actual act of moving, not just actual dance, but like fighting, katas, all that kind of stuff. Vapor, which is like smoke, incense, perfume. Mathematics, which is mathematics. And then a rhythm, which is how you talk, poetry, songs, instruments, and music, that kind of stuff.
Like one of my favorite spells actually is a rhythm spell, and it's a very interesting read on what rhythm could be. It's actually listening to the breathing of your opponent, and that would be the rhythm component to that spell. So a lot of it is kind of looking at the world around you and giving it scientific laws that could be manipulated. And so that's one of my favorite things about the Magic system. When it got presented to me, we sat down and we played with it a little bit. And I know we're saying that you're not going to have somebody who goes down the street throwing a lot of fireballs, but it doesn't mean that you're not powerful. There are powerful spells in there, the ones that do straight damage and things like that. And the casters do have a lot of flexibility. Like, for example, just like in 5th edition where you cast spells, you can take a rest and then get spells back. We have a mechanic like that as well. So you can go out and you can adventure, and you're not going to worry about having some of the 3rd edition, 2nd edition problems of, yeah, I cast 3 spells, I'm done for the day.
The short work day. I'm going to get to you, JMR. Thank you very much. So of the 4, of the 5, the one that kind of strikes me as being a little odd, what's up with the Vapor? You guys all like to smoke up a lot or something?
No. No, not at all for me, at least. No,
I'm
Vapor.
just messing, man. I'm just messing.
I was gonna say Vapor is really thematic to the setting. Considering we're drawing from Arabic and Aramaic cultures, hookah is a social gathering. So the idea of having a spell system that's based upon the hookah or incense or even the steam off of tea, depending on what region you're in, that is kind of the first one that we picked out of all the mediums because it made the most sense. We've talked about like extending to other mediums when we look at other systems and other settings, essentially, rather. Like if we were to do a Mythic China, one of the things that I think would be really important would be doing an ink medium, because of calligraphy and the importance of that as a culture. That's kind of how we got to the decision on all the different mediums. We basically said, is this culturally significant enough to merit it being in the Magic system? And
Yeah.
and with that focus in mind, that's how we ended up with the 5 that we've got currently.
Yeah. Another example is, it's not just Aramaic. We're going into Babylonian, Egyptian, Nubian, Chinese, Indian. I mean, there's so much influence coming in on this game that when you think Vapor, don't think so straightforward. This could be chalks or paints, dust from the paints pre-mixed, and spices and that are floating through the air. Like, you got to really let yourself kind of get out there.
Well, actually, I did think that. I think like odors, scents, and his breath as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just found that one just stood out to me for of the 5, and I found it interesting. So, how compatible is this game with 5th edition? Like, how interchangeable would the 2 be?
I would put it next to Adventures in Middle Earth. You could bring over a 5th edition character, but it's not going to fit properly. Like in Adventures in Middle Earth, if you bring over a ranger, it's a little strange being a ranger in Middle Earth. It makes more sense to be like a strider or something like that. That just it works for the setting. I could see non-casters fitting really well. Casters as a foreign caster, I can imagine a really good RP with that, actually. Like, I don't think the Magic systems would necessarily like work well with each other, but a GM that wants to take on that challenge, that could be a really interesting story, that you're a foreign sorcerer from a foreign land.
It's also important to note that the power scaling between classes and monsters and everything in Subari is a bit different than what you would find in normal 5e. For example, one of our kind of rogue analogs called the Bedouin, like the abilities of that class would overshadow another rogue in a lot of ways. And the reason we decided on this is because if you look at any of the 1001 Nights in the Tales with the roguish characters like Sinbad or even Shahrazad in the Framework Tale, these are people who are very skilled. people who are very cunning and very witty, and people who are able to get out of danger almost impossibly, but that danger is always there and it always feels very real. So we wanted the characters in Subari to feel like these iconic characters like Sinbad and Aladdin, and to be people who who basically, you don't fight goblins at level 1, right? You don't fight much of things at level 1, but when you do fight, it's very deadly. But the adventure seems to focus more on verbal and the environment around you and skill challenges and everything. A lot of power is allocated to that instead of just raw combat and hitting things with your axe or a scimitar in this case.
Which brings us to the point of this is why Subari is releasing with its own class system, original classes.
Okay. I keep going back to the 5e thing only because a lot of our audience is 5e, so I want to give them something to gauge it by. But also you could just go download it for free, I believe, over an RPG drive-through, or drive-through RPG. Say it wrong every time.
Yeah. The good part is if you have a foundation in 5th edition, just like if you pick up Adventures in Middle-earth, maybe 5-10 minutes of fiddling with the system and understanding how those classes work, you are set. You understand how to play the game. And that honestly is why we are comparing our product to Adventures in Middle-earth, because Adventures in Middle-earth did it right. They captured all of the core stuff that you need from 5th edition, added enough stuff to make it feel different, and took away a little bit of things that were a little extraneous to the setting. So we're kind of using that as our guide on post. And honestly, like I said, if you have a 5th edition background, this will be a very easy pickup for you to run, play, or anything. As a GM, you might need to take a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with the setting and kind of the regions. But the good part is a lot of those regions you generate on the fly using some of our charts. So like I said, it's your Subari in the end. So a lot of that is going to be kind of guided through the book, but ultimately your decision as the GM what things you want to include or not include.
As far as putting Subari into a pre-existing 5e world, it's entirely possible for the simple fact that the way that Marquise has designed the map and the regions is that it kind of, Subari to this point has existed in somewhat of a vacuum because of a vast salt land to the north. So this, almost continent would appear to the south. And you can have that dead space of the salt lands being the only barrier that separates them. And that's kind of important for the plug and play aspect.
And Chelsea mentions plug and play. That's the biggest philosophy I use when I design anything, be it for narrative and fluff stuff or for raw mechanics. I'm a big believer that a good RPG book can be used by anybody for almost any purpose. But what we do is we make Subari very modular. You can break it apart. You can use the different region generators in there. You can use many of the different rules in a normal 5e game. Verbal duels, again, work perfectly in base 5e since they originated from there, as do skill challenges, the new conditions, hookahs and teas, and all that stuff. So even if you don't want to play Subari straight, you can easily just pick up the book once we fully release it and just use the bits and pieces that you really like from it, and that would enhance your game.
Yeah, and expanding on what Marquise is saying, kind of getting into a little bit more depth, is this book is filled with so many tables your head is going to explode at first. He is what I call a master making these roll tables, and you're going to have everything from rumors and secrets and regions to NPCs, little encounters for each different place. I mean, it's really broken down that you can use these bits and really run in a very enriching Aramaic themed 5e game without our classes and magic system.
It's the 80s all over again. That's what I'm feeling a little bit.
It's a little old school.
Yeah, nice. It harkens back to, I always say in the 80s, like, I think they judged how good their RPG game was based on how many charts and tables they could put into it.
Well,
I think he definitely has taken inspiration from that.
Yeah, I was going to say my idea on that, because I played during that period. I was very young in my career, but like, the cool thing that a lot of people don't get, and they get intimidated when they pick up like AD&D and they look at all those charts and stuff, is not all those charts are necessary. You don't really need all of them. And that's the part where some people sometimes get a little lost looking at older like 80s products, is they see all the charts and they want to use all of the charts all of the time. And that's something that we try to guide out inside before we even get to the charts is, hey, these are all the charts that are available to you. Use them sparingly, focus more on your narrative, but these are here to support your storytelling. Which sometimes the 80s books were not like that. They were like chapter 2 charts, and it was like 60 pages of charts.
Yeah, ours are definitely much more broken down by regions and, types of encounters and NPCs. And, each one is kind of segmented where they're supposed to be thematically and in reference to the other material. And there's plenty of fluff inside there to kind of support them to give you an idea of what you're working with.
Very cool. I'm going to start the roll call, people. So just if you want to call out where you're from, we'll keep talking, and I'll jump down to the roll call momentarily. JMR had asked a question, not specifically about what we're talking about, but I want to answer it real quick. He says, we inspired him to DM. Awesome. That's kind of why we do this. And what advice do you have for a new DM? I know we've got some better DMs in here, so I'll throw it to you guys.
Actually, that's perfect, because right now, my back pocket project has been Knights of the Lamb, which is 110% focused for new players and new DMs. It is, I don't want to say this in an offensive term, but it's very hand-holdy. It has little notes from us to suggest how to run this scene. It has, again, tables, but it also has pre-laid out adventures for you to run, either as one-shots or as a mini-campaign. And it is 110% focused for young adults and new DMs. So that's actually something you're going to see coming from us. As far as advice, the best thing I can tell you is to not plan. There's people going to just blow their minds that I don't plan anything. Let it come to you. Let your characters and your players tell your story and roll off of them.
Yeah, my advice would be kind of similar. The first thing that I do is I sit down with each of my players for a campaign, and I say, hey, what do you want to play? And I am there during the character creation process as much as possible. My normal group, we play via Google, and they live in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and I live in Texas. So there's a huge geographic distance between us. But what I do is I set up Facebook chats, and I say, hey, you said you were going to play an alchemist since we're playing Subari. What kind of alchemist do you want to be? Give me a little bit of your background. And essentially, I will write the first adventure has nothing to do with any of them in most cases. And it's just to get them introduced to mechanics, especially if it's a new system. But then at the end, I'll throw in something like the alchemist is looking for his missing sister. At the end, after they fight the Bishop, which is kind of like a water dragon thing, they find his sister's bracelet, or at least a bead that is broken off of the bracelet. Something to kind of key into that character. And the big thing that I do to keep the game going is I focus in on touching on each one of the characters. Where I may do like 2-3 games on one character, but I eventually move the light over to somebody else, and I trigger on something else that somebody else does. Another great thing to do is see what your players latch onto and focus your efforts on building that. Too many times as a young GM did I build a gigantic, cool city that I was like, this is going to be so awesome. There's monsters in the government. It's going to be great. And then my players decided to take a left turn and never entered that city. It was 6 hours of my life that could never come back. So really invest in the things that the players love, and they'll love it even more the more you invest into it.
So my bit of advice has to deal with introducing problems to your players. When you introduce a problem, never introduce a solution, and a lot of the time don't even have a solution to it. I made this mistake a lot of time when I was first starting out GMing. One time Chelsea was in a game, and she was in a city game, and her and another player blew up half the city and never got out of the alleyway. So the entire plot I had for that was gone, and it was useless, as Chris said, to do all that prep. But when you introduce something for the players to go against, they will always surprise you how they end up conquering the issue or the obstacle you have out before them. And so a lot of the time, while you can have hints and clues and everything for things that would make their life easier, the players generally don't care if it makes their life easier. They just want to do what they want to do and see if it works or not. So if you're playing like a Subari game and you have an assassin and the harem for the Sultan and everything, don't go around putting all these clues like leading to the identity and how to stop this assassin's master plan. Just have the assassin be in the harem and let your players do what they want to try and solve that issue, and just play off of what they do realistically, go to the logical consequences of things. And if they do something that would solve the problem right then and there like that, let it do so. It's going to make the players feel strong. It's going to actually enrich the story instead of weakening it, and it lets you go on to the next portion of what you guys want to do in the game.
Which kind of brings me to an extra point, and this is something that we're doing in Knights of the Lamb. Instead of having these things that your players have to interact with, we set up 5 things that happen no matter what the players do, and they affect the world in some way. It might be good for the players, it might be bad, but these are events that regardless of if your players jump on the lead and go for it, it happens and affects something.
Awesome. I'm going to jump into the chat real quick for the roll call. We got Fishes Twonk in Liverpool, England. Nubs is in Tacoma, Washington. He's one of our staff writers. We've got Zach and Bidet from India. Oh, no, Indiana. A little bit different, slightly different. We got Ember Shade from Arkansas. We got Uncle Peter in Toronto. Prue Prue's in Denmark. We got Lord Crunk in Massachusetts, Epic Jim in Canada. We got Douglas in Missouri, Comic Book University, Titan, Homo Thanos. Sure, buddy, sure. We've got JMR, Kato PJ is in Australia. Frigginator 1369 is in Washington State. Andrew Vella is in Corpus Christi, Texas. We got Andrew Oren in Fort Lauderdale. Holtz is in Alberta, Canada. David Bliss is in Melbourne. We got Zareth Gaming from New Mexico. We got Victor from Niagara Falls. We got Tom Harris in Seymour, Indiana. And it jumped on me and I get lost sometimes. True Mate over in Wales. Frigginator wants some extra karma. Wrong game today, buddy. And we got Alabama in the house as well with Rico. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Much appreciated. And much like you, Marcus, I kind of do the same thing. I leave the solutions open-ended. I might come up with 1 or 2 that I then divorce myself of. And the only reason I do that is because sometimes the players get stuck. And in this way, I just have an idea of some guidance. But for the most part, you know, I let them put it out there. And even like with your assassin in the harem, like I feel most of the time it's way better to let them provide the solutions and the clues. Yeah. You know, I think the number one tool you can develop as a GM is really just, you know, listen. A lot of times when my players are talking, as long as they're in game, I will just let them talk. And they will give me, you know, they will give me the ideas to put into the game, whether it's a session next or down the road. But, you know, that's the best inspiration that you can possibly come up with, in my opinion. And the other thing for a new GM, just get in there and do it, get your hands dirty. You know, it's just like anything. Yeah. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
One thing that I would suggest if you're feeling nervous as a new GM, think of something silly. Silly games are always entertaining for everyone. Usually when there's a holiday, I do ridiculous holiday adventures. I did Oath of the Frozen King by Absolute Tabletop when it was playtesting for Easter, and my players got to throw fireballs at hordes of children while fighting a zombie Easter bunny that was being resurrected. Stuff like that, even if you don't necessarily GM 100%, your players are going to enjoy it because it's silly and fun. So I would definitely recommend your first couple of adventures, just go crazy with it, ham it up a little bit, and you'll find that you get past that nervousness real fast when you do that.
And hopefully too, if you're GMing for the first time, you're playing with your friends. So like, you know, if you're friends, it should be, you know, it should be easier or harder depending on what kind of friends you have, as the case may be. So you got this project out. Do you have anything else in the pipeline?
Yeah. One of my favorite authors, John Harper, who wrote Blades in the Dark, also wrote a series of different games, like one-page games. And part of us trying to keep our brains active as a group is we've been looking at some of these one-page projects he's done and creating our own hacks or versions of it. Lasers and Feelings happens to be the one that we're highlighting at the moment. And we have an outline set for 10 lasers and feelings hacks that will be condensed into one book. But they've gained a lot of traction. It's been a lot of fun doing them because they're very narrative focused, very simple games. They're easy for us to write and kind of play with ideas. In fact, in a lot of ways, they're kind of rough drafts for future projects for us. It gives us a chance to kind of like quickly jot something down, play a couple sessions, and see if it's worth investing full time into. So a lot of these smaller like projects really help us out in the long run, but it's available as free material for anybody who's following us on Facebook.
It also lets us do some of the more, like Chris was mentioning earlier, the fun and silly games. Those who are a little bit older will probably know of the movie Bedknobs and Broomsticks. And that is one of our upcoming themed laser and feelings hacks coming. And just, you know, your apprentice witches and wizards who are fighting the Nazi menace.
As far as future projects, we've talked about Lady Blackbird, which is another John Harper product, and Blades in the Dark. We've talked about looking into Open Legend and doing some setting stuff for Open Legend. Because I'm not sure there's much mechanically that Open Legend really needs. It's a pretty neat system. I know that Nerdarchy's featured it a couple times. We've also talked about other settings kind of passingly. Dungeon World is one that we kind of touched upon, and I think we've come to the conclusion that we'd be okay with doing a setting, but there's already a lot of material for Dungeon World, so it's not necessarily worth the mechanical investment. And that's kind of where we're at with a lot of systems. Is there's a lot of people who do a lot of really good things, and I would rather invest time to create something that I think is missing than reinvent the wheel and just redo basically what somebody else is already doing.
And I agree with that completely. Much to Chelsea and Chris's charging, I have creative ADD times 1,000. I can't stop myself from coming up with new stuff, making new settings, making new ideas and rules and all that stuff. So I always have my hands in about 10 to 100 different pots at any given time. I'm always creating something new, pitching at them, and they have to remind me, oh, you gotta keep working on Subari, or you gotta keep working on this and that. And reluctantly, I do so, and I shelve those other ideas for the future. So we always have stuff to keep working on, be it mechanical or fluff or stories or zines or what have you. So I'm always basically working on what our next few projects would be. And I always have it in my head what the next thing we're going to be working on is.
Yeah, if you could see our shared files, there are so many in the shelved product or projects folder that it's ridiculous. I mean, just to like off the top of our heads list a couple, Port Noir, which was originally a one-shot and kind of theory crafting area, has become its own beast. And then we have working title Judgment being worked on and thought about. You know, we like to have things in the back of our head so that when we have ideas and they fit into that little nook, we can keep putting them in there, because like something might not work for Subari, but it might work really good for Port Noir or Judgment. Mm-hmm. Or even like Austere, which is the Angel's Compendium rewritten. The Angel Compendium is the first book that me and Marquise wrote together. We've since taken it down because we want to rework on it and, you know, bring it into its own light and do it kind of justice. But there's always something else in the background going on.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier that we all have kind of our personal pet projects. Mine happens to be one called Xiao Yun, which is kind of a mythic China feel to it. I've probably been working on that for about 3 years, and that's before even I started writing with a point of inspiration. And every so often there's the conversation of, hey, I think this would work really well for Xiao Yun, and I scribble it down and I put it to the side and I hide it for that day that I can present a almost half-done project to be like, all right, it's time to do Xiao Yun. And that's pretty much how we present a lot of our projects to each other.
So has that got wire fu in it, or the other kind of mythical?
Oh, definitely a mix between folklore and wire fu.
Nice. Sounds good.
The idea is to create kind of like Chinese cinema kind of feel with folklore inspiration as your game. Is kind of the best way to describe what I envision it to be.
I feel like the older I get, the less real and gritty I want. And also the more rules light. You had mentioned Open Legend. We're actually playing a game of that now. We run weekly. pretty much. And you're right, it is a system that's wide open for everything. It's one of those systems that really takes an understanding and kind of agreement between the player and the GM to, for everyone to not be an asshole, essentially, to make it work, because it is so open-ended and you can kind of do whatever you want with it. That, and the exploding dice can make things go kind of gonzo, which is fun.
I love exploding dice. Legends of the Five Rings uses them. So I always think it's hilarious when like you get that one random roll and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I got 104 damage. What are you going to do?
Suck it, baby. That's it. 104 damage. Yeah. I mean, I think it makes it a lot of fun. And, in Open Legend, there isn't even really character death unless the GM calls for it narratively. Yeah. So, so that's fun. Like our very first session of that, it's kind of like this Arcana punk eldritch horror espionage fantasy game. They were flaying this like Cthulhian monster, and the one character that was a psychic decided to try and contact it mentally. I'm like, oh, that's what you want to do, okay? And the dice exploded all over the place. And in D&D, that character would have just been dead. Like his head would have probably been blown off his head. But instead, because it's Open Legend, there's a little bit more room to do more fun things with it. So now, like that character is constantly kind of being pursued in his dreams by this monster. He got to survive it, but we had cool things that happened because of that.
And
you mentioned, go ahead.
That's actually kind of why originally I was looking at Open Legend for Xiaoyun. But the more we've invested into Subari, I think that we can make what Subari is will work for Xiaoyun. Because a lot of what we're doing is looking at not necessarily like your bad choice kills you, but this is a bad choice. This is what would come out of it if you were to live, kind of thing. Like there's a whole region called the Great Mirage that is all about moral consequences. When you're out there, you may have a verbal duel with a genie, but the real interesting part is what happens because of that verbal duel with the genie. And that's one thing that we kind of really exemplify as far as like our little GM pointers that we've written out for the book so far.
And see, Subari is very much almost a groundwork project because it's laying out what Marquise is calling the tapestry for all of our future projects. We are trying to really encompass something that fits, the extremes of our imagination and can fit all of these things, like Port Noir, which is completely based on limbo and the after death and the in between, and magic as we know it in 5e will not work there. That system just is not compatible with what we really wanted for Port Noir. And that goes even farther into our other slated projects, like our Primitive World, where it's completely taking out any kind of metalworking. Like we're pre-Bronze Age here, pure primitive, and focusing on survival and shelter and those sorts of things. We wanted to create the groundwork of a system that can fit and encompass all of those ideas later down the road. So in essence, Subari is kind of one giant playtest for all of our future books.
Excellent. So what do you think, like, so far, like you guys working together on this project, what has been like the greatest challenge for this project for you guys?
Marquise has been the greatest challenge.
Oh, nice.
No, like, let me explain it a little further, but he has, but in a good way. Marquise has a super hard drive because he knows that if he spends too much time on something, he'll get distracted and abandon it, and he doesn't want to do that with Subari. So I know Chelsea's been getting the side IMs because I get the side IMs, and he's like, "Hey man, did you look at the Jolly today? I need you to get back to me on the Sage." And it's like, Marquise, I have a 40-hour job that I'm trying to do. Give me a second. I'll get to it later today. But
oh, I don't want to hear it because you haven't gotten the off-the-wall requests that I have gotten.
Yes, I can only imagine the art requests.
So our previous playtest was handed to me 3 days before release. And I was told, get this done in 3 days. It's 60 pages long. Good luck. I got it done. I looked at him. I said, you ever do that to me again, I swear. Do not do that to me again.
We work really well with that pressure, and Marquise has more or less taken the role as head editor of this project. So he's really he's found a way to communicate with both of us well, to be able to put that pressure on so that we perform at the level that we need to for this swing. But jokingly aside, the biggest challenge was when we made the transition from Al-Qadim to Subari. We had to look at what things were the core ideas that we definitely wanted to keep, and then what things we really wanted to change. Like originally, when we were going to do the Al-Qadim stuff, we were going to include some charts on how to generate random desert environments. Like if you got lost in the desert, here's some charts of things that you could find. Well, we really liked that, so we carried it over to Subari, but we're like, nah, let's do the whole map. Everything is able to be random if the GM wants it. And really kind of extrapolating that to its current phase, that transition was probably the hardest thing that we had to go through so far. A lot of it has flowed really well for us, though.
The transition was very difficult. Specifically for me, what was hard is that I like to pay a lot of attention to detail to the cultures that we draw from. I'm very big on making sure we're respectful to all the source materials and making sure that nothing is portrayed offensively, and that it still keeps that kind of cool new flair and flavor to it. So when you look at like the 1001 Nights, the actual nights, even though they're considered Arabian tales, they draw on folklore, superstition, and ideas from everywhere as west as Spain and the entire Mediterranean, and everywhere as east as China and India and Pakistan and all that kind of stuff. So basically Southeast Asia. So drawing from all these different areas, turning them into game mechanics, into fluff, into roll tables, into regions and races and all that stuff, it was a real challenge orchestrating things to make sure they still feel authentic, fresh, new, magical, and all those other really cool things. But as Chris said, once you get over that hurdle, it's really smooth going. And it's been really rewarding to be able to marry the mechanics and the ideas of Subari with the actual source materials that we're drawing from.
For me, it was definitely the way it happened was, of course, Marquise got into my instant message box, and he goes, "How do you feel about illuminations?" And I was like, okay, you're going to have to expand on that, because my idea of illuminations is very Euro-based. And so he starts showing me these different pages. And I started to get really inspired by these old texts. And I wanted to be extremely historically accurate to the colors, the themes, and the type of imagery that was portrayed. So I did a lot of research into the color matching, historical color matching. I was making sure that for example, a kimono in Japanese cultures, the way you wear it, the color, the pattern, all has a meaning. So I did a lot of research in making sure that we were very respectful to all of those things within the cultures that we were taking influence from. And I really wanted to have what I call hidden imagery inside of our illumination pages. Just, kind of showcasing and showlighting different inspirations from all the different cultures. And overall, that one page that has been shown so far took me 17 hours.
So real quick, for some of us that aren't entirely sure what illuminations are, what's an illumination?
Okay, so in Euro books, an illumination would be that big fancy page that has like the once upon a time giant letter, and then around it has all like the little, pictures and decorations and patterns all around it. So for us, the illumination page is something like you would see out of the Quran almost, or different ancient texts from that area. And it's patterns and, symbols and a lot of those things. And it's basically this giant visual pow in your face for the beginning of each chapter.
Okay. So any one of you can give me this before we wrap up and leave. 5-minute elevator pitch.
Marquise, this one's yours.
5-minute elevator pitch. All right, I got you. So take Lord of the Rings, take the Forgotten Realms, take Dragon Grin, take Dark Sun, take all that stuff and throw it out. Throw all the cultural trappings away, throw all the aesthetics away, throw all that away and draw from something new. Travel across the deserts, meet sultans and belly dancers and genies, smoke mystical hookahs and drink the teas, wear the perfumes, look for new and wondrous things, amazing things that you've never seen anywhere else. Duel with people in the bazaars over the prices of flying carpets. Duel with people with scimitars underneath moonlight that get the attention of courtesan queens. Do all these things with a new aesthetic and a new style to them. You have new classes, you have new races that play completely different than the ones in 5e right now, but still keep that same 5th edition feel to it. Create your own regions so that way no two Subaris are the same. Go to Paristan Reef with fairy tale-like wonder. Go to the Great Mirage, where you can have these moral consequences and almost horror-like things. Go to the Basin of Yum to see intrigue, or the islands of Rawa Avis for daring adventures, and to discover these new cultures all along the way. Create your own map and experience high adventure with mechanics behind it that have never really been used before in another tabletop role-playing game, and that would be my pitch for Subari.
Freaking awesome. Guys, go download it for free. It's on DriveThruRPG. There is a link in the description. Follow these guys over on Facebook so you can stay in touch with them, with what they're doing. And with that, I just want to thank you guys for coming out. Thank everybody for hanging out with us. Not a bad turnout considering we had a little bit of flubbage in the beginning and it's the 4th of July. So with that, everyone enjoy your 4th of July. Go get some hot dogs and hamburgers and watch some fireworks. So until next time, stay nerdy. And we actually went live a little while ago and had to do it again. The Googles, for whatever reason, was recording but not playing. Happens. So I guess we'll take it from, you know, where we're kind of talking about, you know, why you guys decided to do this, what you felt was, you know, lacking out there that made you guys decide to jump in. And also you'd also talked about, you know, you were going to do this in the DMs Guild but moved in a different direction.
Yeah, so Subari is ultimately what Adventures in Middle-earth is to 5th edition, but instead of Adventures in Middle-earth, Subari is based upon the Arabian folklore and stories that it draws inspiration from. Kind of similar in vein where we're trying to pull from a lot of the historical and fictional, in a lot of cases, kind of stories to create our own world based upon it. We're doing a lot of that inside the game. Like there are terms that are relative to the area that we draw inspiration from. I mentioned it in the previous stream, but I'm going to assume that none of that got heard by anybody, so I'll mention it again. I got my start in a very narratively focused system, Legend of the Five Rings, and it's been a system that has been with me for a long time. It is so in-depth into its narrative that the mechanics are entirely designed to exemplify its narrative. And that's one of the things that we've really taken on board, is to try and create mechanics that surround the narrative to the story we're trying to tell. So the first step was to kind of think about the kinds of stories they are, and they're high adventure stories. So 5th edition, while it's very good at combat, it lacks some things to help support the idea of high adventure. When you see stuff like Sinbad doesn't fight monsters every single point. Likes playing social characters, but he's not a very socially graced person. So sometimes when he does the RP, I give him bonuses because he's RPing and he's trying, but honestly his argument isn't very good. So this system kind of helps alleviate that sort of thing.
That is like the age-old like Nerdarchy argument that we've had in numerous discussions, and it is essentially the, you know, the, if someone is really good at RPing, they can kind of like ignore certain skills, opposed to someone, you know, and then the person who maybe isn't as good or invested heavily mechanically in their character, then they're kind of being penalized, you know, for that. Where,
yeah, I mean, I always make the joke, I don't make you break down my door, so why should I make you RP out the social encounter? Like, to some extent, I'll have you explain it, and that's just generally how I run things. And this mechanic does basically support that. There's a little bit of explaining that goes into it, the RP side, but ultimately, the mechanics will support it. So even if you, as a person, are not necessarily super skilled in having an argument yourself or establishing kind of a factual conversation, the game itself will support that and help you out with that.
Yeah, I think we've negotiated to some middle ground in between.
That's kind of what we're shooting for with the verbal duels. Marquise, you want to go a little bit more into how the mechanics actually support that?
Yeah, so how a verbal duel works is like the biggest difference between it and combat is that you only have two people actually talking to each other. Everyone else is supporting one of the two parties in the verbal duel. So let's say you have a party of four people. One person goes to talk to the Sultan in Subari. The other
systems is basically the idea that we've thrown the entire existing magic system in 5e out the window and sat down one day and had what was a 5-hour conversation building the bases of new classes and new magic systems that they would use. And that mostly comes from the fact that while 5e is good at doing what it does, we didn't want a world where somebody just threw a fireball at you. It's not that type of world. It's more flavored than that. There's, and some of this is fluff, but mechanically speaking, it goes in another direction as well, which Marquise wrote the lion's share of these this new magic system. So that's definitely his domain to go deep into it.
So you guys mentioned some new classes, changing the magic, bringing skill challenges back into the mix, and also, would you call it verbal sparring or verbal
dueling? Yeah,
verbal dueling. That's it.
Yeah, it's in its most simplistic form, it is basically combat done on a verbal scale. There's a set of rules that really kind of support it, and the way that I kind of described it when I was doing the editing for it is, I said it kind of feels like the Ace Attorney games. You say objection, and then you say what your objection is, which is funny in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it makes it very uniform. So you can say, oh, I want to bargain. This is what I'm RPing out by bargain. So there's a structure and an RP phase to it. And the good part is it doesn't heavily require you to be a very good, for example, bargainer as a person. It does rely on your character stats. However, it encourages the RP to go with it, because I know, at least my home group, one of my guys,
Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, and this is take 2 for Nerds by Nerds, and I'm hanging out with a point of inspiration today, and we're going to be talking about 101 Knights of Subare, and I'm probably butchering that, but that's okay. These guys will correct me. That's what they're here for. So let's basically everything we just talked about a few minutes ago, let's do it again. That was great. Take it from the top.
All right, so I'll introduce myself again. I'm Chelsea Dabbs. A lot of people know me better as DM Night Hag. I run the graphic design department over at A Point of Inspiration. Anything that you've seen visually, from the 9-page primer to the illumination pages that we've teased here and there, that's all me. I decide visually what goes into the book, with, a good amount of suggestion from the other two. I'm not a mean ruler by any means.
All right, I'm Chris Wilhelm, originally from the channel Drop Dice. That's how most people can find me. I am the editing / kind of idea bouncing board here for Point of Inspiration. And then for Subari, I will actually be doing the map and doing some of the illumination and editing to help out with the graphic design side of things.
So my name is Marquise Hardis. I'm the lead writer at A Point of Inspiration. I basically do all the core writing in the books, and I come up with all the mechanics, or at least the foundations of them. And then I bounce them off of Chris and Chelsea and a few of our other consultants that we have outside of that. So that's pretty much what my job is here.
Awesome. And like I said,
he goes to, he sometimes has an adventure where he has to go scale up an unscalable cliff and retrieve a sultan's turban and bring it back to gain a wish to do something else, because the stories are kind of complicated like that. So we started thinking about some of the extra things that wouldn't be necessary. The project originally started as Al-Qadim plus a couple of minor things, but it slowly blossomed into our own IP. And a lot of that has to do with the idea of these new mechanics, one of which being skill challenges, which we'll address a little bit later, and the new magic system. that further exemplifies kind of the nature of the influential countries.
Excellent.
So I'm a big believer in the fact that if a game doesn't have a mechanic, the game does not support that mechanic. Of course, you can create your own mechanics and you can house full things and make up stuff on the fly, which is totally fine. We completely support that, and we do it ourselves. But if the game doesn't have the mechanic, you have to make it yourself. Well, basically, like I said, the game doesn't support that. So we were working on Subari back when it was originally Alkadim. There are a few things you'll see in 5e that they don't have. Skill challenges like Chris mentioned, verbal duels being another one, so like social combat or social encounters. And as we started making these things and creating these mechanics, at a certain point, it was just no longer base 5e, right? So it could no longer really fit on the DM's Guild regardless, because it was almost, it would be like putting Adventures of Middle-earth onto the DM's Guild, which is just kind of, it doesn't make any sense because the DM's Guild is for like supplementary adventures and new lore and new monsters. And while we have those things, just the new mechanics that we have for Subari itself really differentiates it from the core game.
Yeah, and breaking into like one of those